back. Now it's time for Project Management Part 2. Today we're going to talk about why the traditional project management systems don't work. You hear a lot of those big terms. You hear about project baselines, you hear about critical path, you hear about average cost, budgeted cost, earned value. All these terms are floating around. And then when you get into the accounting world, you learn about actual cost versus budgeted cost. You also hear specifically about what you spent relative to your overall budget. All these tools come together to make project management pretty confusing, and also makes it possible to write a whole lot of books about this kind of stuff that frankly are really boring. I can tell you I know because I've tried to read a few of them. What we're going to talk about today is why the traditional project management system doesn't work. Let's make this very simple. To make project management work, you need two things. You need a way to track your project on a weekly basis in terms of schedule. You need to be able to track your project on a weekly basis in terms of the hours you're spending on the project. You need to track your project in terms of your costs, hard costs in terms of material on the project, and compare that to your original plan. Once you have those things in place, you can throw all the terms, jargon, and all the problems out of the way. Now let's go to a seemingly difficult, but actually a simple plan for a major project here at Setpoint. It's up on our wall, and you can see as you look at it, there's a lot of detail here, but really what we're looking at is our major milestones and the things we need to accomplish to produce the things we need to do. That's the schedule. That's where you start. Now let's talk about where the wheels fall off and how we go wrong. First of all, your accountant is your worst enemy in project management, because accounting and GAAP accounting, and when I say GAAP I mean the generally accepted accounting principles, give you accounting for projects using a certain simple metric. You measure the revenue you've earned on a project by the percentage complete you are based on cost. What does that mean? Let me explain what it means. Let's say that we have a $5 million project and your budget to finish the work is $4 million. So the PO or the order from your customer is for 5 and your budget is 4. This is great. It's $1 million profitability planned on the project. So let's say that after the first year of this project, and let's say it's a 2-year project, you've spent $2 million on the job. Well, if it's still on budget, you spent $2 million. You have $4 million total in your budget. That means you're 50% complete. So we would recognize half of the revenue, which again, 50% times 5 million would give you 2.5 million, right? So what we'd show on our income statement for profitability on this partially completed project is $2.5 million of revenue, $2 million of cost, and a $500,000 profit. Now the question I have for you is, even though our accountant told us that's real profit, how real is that? Is it possible that your $4 million budget isn't real? How do you know that you're still going to finish the job for 4? What if it costs you 6 to complete the project? Well, that profit you reported in the first year is completely bogus. So really, when you look at project-based accounting, the project manager is the most important accountant, because their ability to estimate the total cost on the project over under as you go through the project will determine the percentages you use to recognize revenue. The problem with using cost on a construction job is if you take, for example, a $4 million job and $3 million of it is buyout material, well, in the first 2 months, if you buy all the material for $3 million, according to accounting, you're 75% done. And that means you recognize 75% of the profit, but you haven't put any labor in. Well, that's a big fallacy, and we believe that you have to measure your progress by labor only, or by earned value. A couple of tools we'll talk about later. The accounting model just doesn't work. And in fact, it creates a situation where you end up with what I like to call walking dead companies. Because what happens with a lot of construction companies and project-based companies is they get into a project, they recognize all that profit up front, and then they go out and buy all these things with the extra cash they have from the down payment, and then when they start running over a budget at the end and they find out that their estimates were wrong, what do? They get 2 new projects to pay for the one that went bad. And then they get 4 to pay for those 2 that went bad. And eventually, this company is really bankrupt. They are just 2 down payments away from going out of business. And that's because they're not tracking using percentage achieved on a basis other than what the accountants would say. And that's a critical problem when you get into project management. Now the other side of this is understanding your schedule and being on top of it as well. And that's a whole other issue. But for now, what we want you to understand is the wheels fall off when we do our accounting and when we don't track on a weekly basis. And those are the problems we have with the traditional project management model. Now let me explain why the accounting system doesn't work. That system where you just look at actual cost versus your total budgeted cost. It's simply this. There are 2 components to completing a project: the material you buy and the labor you put into it. In reality, the only way you complete a project is by completing all of the labor. And so by focusing on the overall cost, the project manager and the accountant loses sight of the real issue. Have you performed the work to complete the job? And in our opinion, when we measure our jobs, the only way you can complete it is by studying the hours, understanding the hours, breaking down the hours, and looking at your actual hours versus how many hours you think you need to complete a job. And that is where the wheels fall off with the traditional accounting system and with traditional project management measurement as we look at our financials. So we need to have a system where we track our material costs against our budget to make sure that we're on the right area there. But on the other side, we only measure percentage achieved looking at the hours completed relative to what we think we need to do the job, because at the end of the day, the only way you finish a job is by spending time. It doesn't make any sense to us at Setpoint that you can take credit for buying material as though you have finished a project, because other than the hours you spend purchasing, there really is no added value to completing a job when you buy the material. So why would you take credit for more revenue? That's our thinking, and that's why the accounting system that we traditionally use is flawed. This is a fundamental area where we break from the traditional project-based accounting model. Even in the Fortune 500 companies, it's all about total cost versus actual cost to date. We really don't believe in that approach. It's not fundamentally sound, and you do not understand where you are on your projects. It's dangerous, in fact. And that's why we believe this is a real big point of differentiation between the Setpoint system and the way that traditional project management is completed. Well, that's a little bit about why the traditional project management system doesn't work. In our next session, we're going to talk about the fundamentals of project management and the foundational concepts that you will need to understand and implement if you want to implement the Setpoint system. And one thing we want you to always remember is that project management is just a lot of fun. It's exciting.
Setpoint is not a Walking Dead company. We've been building lean automated equipment for the past 17 years.